Shalom
It's
and
part of
welcome
our learning
to
curve.
another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shabbat. Joining us from the bowels of Solomon Schechter Day School in Long Island. Is that where you are, Barry? Rabbi Barry Chesler, somewhere in the
I'm
basement.
in the basement.
In the basement. So we'll ask people's mechila at the beginning if Barry goes in and out because your Wi-Fi is not great in the basement, and somewhere in it's your apartment, right?
Fifth floor of my offices, fifth floor. You guys are
Okay,
down. You guys are Mima Amakim, and
okay.
I'm
I'm actually also in my basement here. But
I'm at the top.
we're at the pinnacle of the Torah year. We're going to spend some time talking about Parshat Hazinu, which is the amazing parsha this week, and we're going to spend some time talking about Sukkot because we are a few days from Sukkot. We're recording this on the day after Yom Kippur, Motzei Yom Kippur, and we still are. We made it. You know what I'd like to say? I left it all on the bima. I left it all on the bima. I have no voice. Whatever. Hazinu. Let's take the 30,000-foot view of Hazinu and tell us, okay, so Jeremy, your take on the
30,000 foot. Kenesher Yair Kino Al goes
beautiful,
Al as the eagle hovers above its nest, fluttering its wings above the little eaglets, as the parasha would say. So I would propose that the book of Deuteronomy ends almost in three different ways.
yeah.
At the end of Parshat Nitzavim, or Parshat Nitzavim, is a resounding pep talk by Moses about how they're going to live and fulfill the covenant, choose life, because it's within them and they can speak it and they can do it. And on Simchat Torah, we're going to read the blessing that he gives to all the tribes, each of the 12 tribes, and then the death of Moses. And that's a kind of also an affirmation that Moses, relates how we are descended from all of those 12 tribes, from Yaakov. And then Hazinu comes in the middle, and it's a poem of tremendous bitterness and darkness. Parshat Vayelech is the sort of intro, which we read last Shabbat and Shabbat Shuvah, is the intro to this poem. And it says, God says to Moses, you got to take this poem, you got to write it down, you got to teach it to them. Lamda b'nei Israel shirazot sima b'fihem, teach them the poem, put it in their mouths, that is to say, so they can recite it, by heart. And it's miserable. You are going to fail. You are a dor ikeshu fataltol. You are a perverse
Crooked
and twisted generation. You provoke God with non-gods. Well, I'm going to get you with a non-people. And there's a real kind of rebuke. Moses looks at the future and says, this is going to be a failure. And before the show started, we were talking about, before we started recording, we mentioned that there are different modes in biblical religion. Some of them are really affirmative. This is a covenant, you are part of it. And part of prophetic Judaism, Jeremiah and Ezekiel and different of the other prophets, includes real rebukes about everything that you've done wrong and the consequent punishment that is inevitably to follow. And so Hazinu is really part of that trend in biblical religion, is to say that the God of justice is going to punish betrayal, and you're going to betray, and so you guys better watch out.
So it's very interesting that the poem itself, in the Torah makes it out that this poem is going to play a very, very big role. But as the rabbis, I think the rabbis kind of marginalize it. It certainly doesn't play a liturgical role in the Siddur the same way that the song at the sea does. We do have a couple of verses that are pulled out of this Zeno that become part of the liturgy. I think, typically of, Tziduk Hadin, the prayer that we say over the grave at the end of the burial, pulls from Hazinu, a couple of verses. Kishem Adonai Akrahavu Godel Eloheinu. That's pulled from this. That's the verse that is recited just before the Mincha. Barry, I just want to turn to you for a theme, if the theme of justice, as you wanted to talk about here, and that this poem introduces, or not introduces, but reinforces that theme, and just talk about that.
So I think what I like about the poem is that it mentions the idea of Hester Panim, that God's face will be hidden. I think one way that we look at the Bible is, especially the Torah, is that it's our search for God, and God is always there to be found. But here, in near the end of the song, we get this idea that God will not always be found because He will hide His face.
It's
And
verse
I think
20,
this is
verse
a
20.
theology.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a theology I think that has some resonance after the Holocaust and also during some dark periods in our people's history, but it's a hard theology to accept on its face. You'll forgive the pun, that God can actually hide his face from us and turn his back. When we think of God turning his back, we think of Moses in the cleft of the rock and being able to get the glimpse of God's back. It's a kind of divine access. But here, when God turns his back, he is divorcing himself from us and, in a sense, breaking, perhaps temporarily, but always the fear that it's more permanent, the covenant. And it's hard to hold on to an eternal covenant when the other partner turns around and walks away.
So this, I think you've touched on. I think what is the, I think we overuse this word trauma, but it's maybe the word, the most applicable word here, which is that nothing traumatizes a person in a relationship more than abandonment, and the threat of abandonment is itself traumatizing. That when God says "Astira panai mehem," I will turn my face from you.
Well, it's also hard to.
Go ahead. It's also
Go
hard
ahead.
to kind of conceive of that. Yes, it's that if the whole experience of the Bible is that God is with you, I like to say that you could sum up Judaism in the verse in Psalm 23, Gam ki elech begeitz hamavet lo yirara ki ata imadi. 2 words, ata imadi. And when that is threatened, you are with me. And when you are with me is threatened by I will abandon you, I mean that's what do you do with that? And that's I think that you're right. This is the core of this poem, which is why it I think it's completely marginalized, because that's not the normative experience of Judaism. The normative experience of Judaism is I yearn for your presence. I want you in my life, and you're in my life, except I'm not worthy of that, and more and more and more that way. Jeremy.
Yeah, in Eliezer Berkovich, Faith After the Holocaust, wonderful, wonderful reflection, in which Hester Panim plays an enormous role, the occlusion of the divine face, and he distinguishes between two kinds. There's Hester Panim, the so to speak good way. You're bad, I'm punishing you. You deserve it. He says that's not really abandonment, because you might not like it. We might think of it as sort of the abusive parent or something like that, but there's a parent who does something good for the child, or the God who does something good for the people by saying, listen, there's a punishment that has to come here. But then there's Hester Panim, Berkovich says, which is not tachlitic. It doesn't have a point. It's just the mystery of God. And Berkovich goes to say, listen, free will means that God is going to sometimes be mastir, sometimes enter into Hester Panim to let us work it out. And there isn't any other way, because if God were totally present in our lives, all over the place, there would be no room for human action. My phone's ringing. We're just going to let it go. So he says something really, really quite powerful, especially for right after Yom Kippur. He says that when God is occluding the face to allow for human free will, that is the other side of the coin of being erech hapayim, of being patient with sinners. And he said the paradox of the divine is that obviously, while God is being patient with sinners, God is also being patient with the victims of the sinners.
Yeah.
While God is being patient with the sinners, from the perspective of the sinner, God is patient and waiting for tshuva. From the perspective of the victim of the sinner, God is in Hester Panim and letting bad stuff happen. So he calls that the paradox. I think he calls it the paradox of theology, the paradox of the divine, or something like that, which I thought was incredibly vivid. That if in fact you believe in human moral responsibility, and you should, and human free will, and you should, then that's going to mean that there is going to be ways that humans will use that free will in terrible, terrible ways, and we will experience those things as a case of Hester Panim.
Let me just put.
So,
Go ahead, Barry.
what I wanted to add to what Jeremy said so nicely is that we have an example of Hester Panim in in theory, at least in the Parsha, because I think that the Hester Panim that Moses is mentioning in God's name has to do with him. Moses feels abandoned at the end. At the end of the Parsha, we're going to get yet again God telling Moses, you can take a look, but you can't go in the land. And it seems, in a sense, kind of cruel. Why does God keep mentioning this? And I think the reason why God keeps mentioning it is twofold. First of all, Moses himself can't let go. And secondly, at the beginning of the Parsha, it says, Atzur tamim palo yichal d'rachav mishpat, that the rock, God, is pure and complete, and all his ways are justice. And what God is reminding Moses here is that the decision not to let him into the promised land is, in fact, justice. Our God is a God of justice, and sometimes it's not enough for us because we want the God of mercy.
Right, and here I think that's a great point, and it's always interesting. We get so many lovely chidushim here, some novel opinions and novel interpretations, never really associated, Hester Panim with the hiding of the face with Moses himself, because the last moments of Moses' life vis-a-vis God are actually quite tender. God attends to Moses' burial himself. But I think God is also locked in. God can't, there's this motif in folklore that when the king makes an edict, the king can't reverse the edict. And we see that in the book of Esther, right? The king can't reverse his edict. And in the sense that God is also locked in by his justice. And that makes God quite a tragic figure. Look, if you're the one that's abandoning, it's, not only is the people that you abandon are traumatized, but on some level, you yourself are traumatized. I mean, I want to say that God elicits the most pathos in the book because everything, it doesn't turn out the way God wants it. And the end of this parsha, as uplifting as we want it to be, it kind of comes down to a very sad ending, or a sad, the parsha itself, the book totally, because Moses dies. But here it's ki mineged tireh et haaretz. You're going to see the land from a distance, from across. V'shama lo tavo. You're not going to go there. Ela aretz, to the land asher ni noten livnei Israel, that I'm giving to the children of Israel, i.e., not you. And it's like, that's it. That's it.
Yes, and first of all, there's no happy endings. There's no Disney endings in life. Everything is part of the Torah's greatness is, is that it does give us the bittersweetness. It doesn't give us, God is in his heaven and everything works out right. There's actually even the greatest servant of all, the greatest Jew who ever lived, is unfulfilled. But I just want to, I'm not going to read it or cite it, but just say a little bit. The great poet Rachel, the poet of the second Aliyah, and this is actually, the poem is on her grave in Kvutzat Kinneret, looking across to Har Nevo. Her poem is Mineged, and it's about the impossibility of crossing that bridge. Kol ish u nevolo. Everybody's got his own nevo.
Great.
It's an amazing poem. So if you like Hebrew poetry, go check it out. Mineged.
Do you know what? Also, I mean, and this, from this, we're going to have to move on. The word tzur as the rock. So I'm in the process of writing my parsha sheet this week, and not wanting to write on the sad themes. I want to talk about tzur and tzur Yisrael, and how that framing became part of Israel's declaration of independence as a kind of compromise between religious Jews and secular Jews, because tzur Yisrael, the rock of Israel, seems to be both a depiction of God and also metaphorical kind of
The flintiness of the people.
Absolutely. Or no, more like the solidity of the Jewish people. With that, let's go to the most unstable structure in the Jewish year. We are a few days before Sukkot, and of course the tradition is that we are to be building our Sukkot even as we speak and collecting our 4 species. I'm just going to make you free associate. We have a couple of topics that we bandied about, but Sukkot for 20. Okay, pick your favorite theme.
Daily double.
Daily
Oh,
Double. Well, the first theme or a theme that comes to mind, Jeremy. I'm going to start with you. Theme of Sukkot, theme that's occurring to you, and we'll go with that.
so I like the uh when I was younger, I was slightly weirded out by just how kind of like primitive-y, pagan-y the Arba Minim are. Like you take this bouquet
Species, yeah.
and it seems to have not so veiled fertility right, allusions. When I was younger, I was kind of weird. I've come to really love the mitzvah of the Arba Minim, and when we leave our call, I'm gonna go get mine. Uh, the four different species, the lulav, the palm, the etrog, the citron, the myrtle, the hadass, and the arava, the willows, sometimes made a metaphor metaphorized as different kinds of Jews. And there's this midrash that I always really didn't like. There's like the best Jews, which are like the etrog, and then because they have Torah and they both smell and taste, they have Torah and good deeds, and the lulav has a taste, but it has no smell, so it does good deeds, but it represents people without Torah. Hadass is the opposite. It represents people with Torah, but they don't necessarily behave so well. And the poor willow has neither taste nor smell. It represents those Jews who are like, neither Torah nor good deeds. And I always thought this was such an obnoxious and hierarchical kind of dig. And it kind of is, but it also, at a time when I think there's just so much in American life, in Jewish life, so much like scorn of other people, and a sense of like, this one doesn't count, or that one doesn't count, or I'm against this one, or we got to deport that one, or we got to discount your votes, or try to restrict you from voting. Actually, a democracy means you have to bring in all the people, even the ones who you look at as the willow. You look at them as they're not contributing anything, but you got no lulav without them. You need four species, not three. And even if your three are spectacularly beautiful, if you don't have the humble willow, you got nothing. And so I really feel like that kind of like what I thought was an obnoxious, snooty, kind of snobby drosh about the willow actually reminds you that everybody, all of us have perspectives that somebody out there in our society is the worthless willow, but you need them, and you can't have Sukkot without them.
It's a coalition. Barry, what do your association with lulav or anything else related to this?
So what we would add to what you said, Jeremy, is that the willow is also the one of the four species that requires the most care. It's the one that becomes withered very quickly. And it's striking in the way that you presented the midrash is that the one that has nothing on one hand is the one that we have to devote the most attention to, because they are part of our community and we cannot abandon them. But along with that midrash, there's another in the series of midrashim, which that one appears as the last one, where each of the four species is identified with God. And it gives us this lovely image that when we put the four species together, we are holding God or holding on to God. And I think that is part of what makes Sukkot, Zaman Simchatenu, our season of rejoicing.
It's so interesting because you have these midrashic explanations. The symbol of the coalition of Israel, shall we say, and God, and I'm thinking like they're plants. They derive. There's a certain sense of like the physicality of it. There's a palm, there's a willow, there's a myrtle, and there's an etrog, and I love the explanation that there are some different geographical zones within the land of Israel, and there are different geographical zones within the wandering of the Israelites through the desert, and that included in this bouquet of symbols is a symbol for each one of those different stages. Namely, the desert represented by the lulav, which is the oasis, the palm tree of the oasis. The willow, which is the crossing over of the Jordan, which is where you find willows to this day, or along the rivers or along bodies of water. The myrtle, which is near brooks, typically in rocky outcroppings, namely the uplands, and then the etrog, which is the ultimate orchard fruit, requiring copious amounts of water. Right? The pun that the rabbis make on pre-Eitz Hadar. Pre-Eitz Hadar, it's pre-hydro, or what is it? It's the
I,
pun
th- I
between
think I
Hadar and
think
Hidur.
I think in Greek, I think Greek in water is it's clearly hydro. In Greek, I think it's udor or ador or something like that is water. So creates hadar
Okay.
hydro.
So my point is that they're all tied to water, and they're all tied to what is the central anxiety of this time, namely that because the land of Israel is so dependent on the heavens and their production of water, and that we're heading into the season that is, typically the rainy season in Israel, so that these are direct symbols that are evocative of water, and obviously the other ones have a certain poetic resonance within our lives as Jews. Certainly Klal Yisrael and certainly God. But the land, it's great. We have the land, we have God, we have the people, right? Perfect, right? We're like a little bouquet here ourselves.
Ah, we are. That's great.
Okay, so and let me ask you this question. We were talking a little bit before, and I love this theme, which is the proposition that Sukkot really is designed as a universal holiday. Passover is really designed as a particular holiday, and we've kind of inverted them in modern Judaism. We may have spoken about this in the past, but the idea that the Sukkah itself um, is to represent something beyond itself. That Sukkah represents first and foremost, Klal Yisrael, and that community and shelter in the presence of God, and a certain universality. We were suggesting that the holiday that was damaged the most by the pandemic was the Sukkot, because the natural rhythms of community life were really disrupted terribly in Sukkot. Never mind the high holidays. In my show, the first year of the pandemic, we kind of closed the show altogether, and we had people. You can daven. You can always daven by yourself, right? And you can always make a seder with the person closest to you, like your family, your spouse, your kids, or whatever. Okay, you could, that first year of the pandemic, we sat around the seder. I think we were 3 people for it. I mean, it was really small. Once you get to the sukkah, you really feel it, because the sukkah is all about people coming in, people coming out, gatherings, activities, and in my show we have the men's club, the sisterhood, the youth, etc. I mean, and people on their own, they're having their friends over, their visitors, and they always, I know people that every year they have the same certain people coming and visiting, etc. And it's just a joy for them. And that was completely upended during the pandemic. I think it's coming back now. Um, and the whole communal nature, the public nature, and I would say the universal nature of the holiday is what's important, whereas the particular is important in Passover. We've kind of inverted that. I don't know. Speak to that for a second, Jeremy. You have any
Well,
experience of that, or kind of reflection?
I think it's extremely insightful to say that this Passover is the covenantal, the covenantal holiday. You form the breach. You get an identity as Am Yisrael, and for American Jews, I think that it has become in a disproportionate way. Not that there aren't universal themes. Not that obviously, because we are Americans and because the Exodus story plays such a huge role in the history of Black Americans, and because that is and has always been, at the center of the moral meaning of American life. It's very easy and quick to go to that direction and see that everybody has a parallel kind of story, and we should be interested in refugees, because our people will quote refugees from Egypt, which was what was the highest button, from a few years ago. I do think that it would be a great tragedy in Jewish life for American Jews to not see that this is the Pesach is the covenantal communal holiday that binds us together as a people, and it has become in a disproportionate way a universalized holiday. And I love the thought that Sukkot ultimately looks to the worship, as Isaiah imagines that all the world was everybody will have a share in this worship in the sukkah setting. It's a universal holiday, and we've made it like really each our small sukkot. I thought that Elliot's observation was, I thought, just wonderful.
And also, I mean, there you should touch on a couple of other themes, like, for example, the number of sacrifices. We pay attention to
So,
that. The number of sacrifices. I mean, over the course of the holiday of Sukkot, the Torah says it's 70 sacrifice, 70 animals, and that's a huge amount. And what's that about? The symbolic totality of the nations of the world. 70 is that symbolic number of, that's how humanity starts, the 70 nations. Barry, you want to jump in here? Yeah.
so we can look at Sukkot as the original Thanksgiving in the sense it was a time when people gave thanks for their bounty, for what they had harvested. And the other piece of Sukkot that speaks to the universal theme is found in the Haftarot. We have the Haftarah from Zechariah, which foretells a time when everyone will worship the one God. And we include that verse in Aleinu, with which we conclude each of our prayer services. And that is actually quite striking because Aleinu itself, if you take the time to look at the original version of it, has a piece that's very particular, and then at the end is very universal. And the other thing is the battle between Gog and Magog for the Hol HaMoed Shabbat Haftarah, which is part of the Messianic redemption. And I think that what we have here on Sukkot, everyone has to harvest. That, I think, is what makes Sukkot a universal holiday, is that every farmer has to bring in the crops in order to provide for the coming year. And that's something that we share as descendants of farmers, most of us, not farmers ourselves, with people all over the world. And what I like about the image of the sukkah in this context is that the sukkah is actually outside of our house. So our privacy is maintained while we can still host other people. And I think that also is an important consideration in 21st century America.
Right. And so this whole, I mean, it's such a great theme, public and private, and there's so much to learn, on the whole idea of where the boundary is between public and private, and universal in particular, and how that has become somewhat inverted in our time, and to what extent, our Sukkot enable us to kind of go out from ourselves. We also talked about the senses, and that there's a certain sensory enlivenment with the sukkah. I think that, for many of us, Sukkot, it's our favorite holiday. Although you could say that each one of the holidays is favored for certain reasons, but there's something about this holiday that makes one particularly joyous. Perhaps it's, the sense of transition. Perhaps it's the sense of fragility of life. Perhaps it's, the meaning of gratitude and our bodies. Sukkot, I want to say, and you'll debate me on this, Sukkot is the most physical, the most body of the holidays, and maybe you can disagree because there's some body in all.
Well, we did have some holiday yesterday that was really significant in a bodily way.
In that you kind of rigid, not abdicate, but forego, renounce your bodily pleasures.
But of course that's the thing, is that the opposite is true, right? You forgive a little small halakhic detail. Every food related prohibition in Judaism, for the most part, is the amount of food that is the problem is kizayit, right? If you eat an olive-sized piece of tray for whatever, that is the shiur, that is the quantity that counts as a forbidden thing. But in Yom Kippur, it's a larger amount. It's a date size thing, and the idea is that it's not the food that is prohibited; it's the sense of yishuv hadat, like mental composure and physical togetherness. And what we're driving for is that you be driven out of your sense of physical composure. And so I think by renouncing the body, of course, you focus on the effect that that has on the body, and that it scrambles up your mind, and it makes you lightheaded, and it makes you anxious, it makes you sweaty, and that's part of the game.
So, and Sukkot is completely body, because the halachot regarding the sukkah are that you have to eat in the sukkah, you have to dwell in the sukkah, you have to entertain in the sukkah, sleep in the sukkah. If you live in a climate that is conducive to that. And I think you can't not but help think, as you are in the sukkah, that you are there with your body, and you are there with. I mean, I love the fact that in Judaism, you're not only there in your body, you've invited souls. You've invited some people there. It's totally physical, totally tactile, and also slightly ephemeral. It's like, Avram is here. Avram, and I play this game often. Who
Just
would
for
you
one night.
who would you invite to your sukkah? Who would you? Maybe we'll end with this. Just as in a joyful way. Do you have a particular character? We talked about this in the past. Who would you invite to your sukkah? Who's your ushpizin? Anybody, or not? Or what does this mean to be physical in the sukkah? To be, spiritual.
So I think what the sukkah comes to remind us is that to live in God's world, we have to be outside. We're so used to being in our houses where we derive most of our comfort. The week that we spend in the sukkah, we realize we actually need a lot less than we think, and we could get by with a lot less. And by doing with less, we have greater access to the divine. And I think the way that the ushpizin, the guests that we invite, fits in with this is that it brings our distant past together with our near past and our present in this humble abode where we can actually think that we're living with God for the week.
Lovely, lovely. Wow. So it's a spiritual holiday, Sukkot. I mean, I, maybe next week we'll talk about some of the deeper themes connected to Kohelet, which is, but just to kind of give us, Kohelet is not an accident that book is chosen for this time. It makes you think about the deepest issues, really, in your physical world and in your spiritual world, really, and life itself. Wow.
Well, it's existential.
Indeed.
And again, the sukkah focuses us on that as well.
Wow. Okay. So from Ha'azinu, this Parsha, which is complicated, difficult, to Sukkot, which is beautiful, joyous, universal, to the sense that a year has concluded and a year is starting, and that the one phase of our Chagei Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur has been completed, and the next phase, the final phase, with Sukkot, Hoshana Rabbah, Shmini Atzeret, and Simchas Torah, that's beginning. It's really quite joyful, and
Man Simchatenu.
the joy that we have had in talking, and the joy that we always get from the people that watch us. We are so grateful to you for spending time with us. We love your comments. A couple of you wrote in on Barry's Facebook page. We just enjoy that, and keep that coming. And if you know what, since let me put this out to people who are watching us, because we need some love. So if you've watched us over the year or heard us, write in, tell us what you think, okay? Because we love to hear from you, and it would make us feel really good.
Yes, it would.
Because it's
All right.
Simchatenu, for gratitude. Anyway, Shabbat Shalom, Chag
Shabbat
Sameah.
Shalom.
See you next week.
Chag Sameah.
Chag Sameah.
Modim Simcha.